what we're calling the fine print, our registration, exemptions, licensing, and permitting for the food industry here in North Carolina. So for those of y'all who have been with us since the beginning, welcome back, of course, but just a little bit of information in case anyone's new here. This is an educational capacity building project. So it's a 3-year project in partnership with North Carolina A&T University. And this is a project that is going to continue to grow as our project continues down the line. So we're developing a food safety repository. I am so happy to finally say that that website is live and active, and we are starting to populate it with really important and great food safety references for you. We're also hosting food safety training at North Carolina Extension offices, and that's going to kick off in 2025 for us. Our final webinar in the series is going to be in about 2 weeks on May 31st. And we're going to be looking and taking a deeper dive into food labeling and allergen considerations. We hope to see you there. You can scan that QR code and get access to registration. All right, a few logistics today. If you would please mute your microphone while our speakers are presenting. If you have an immediate question, feel free to throw it in that Q&A chat. Lynette Johnston will be there kind of manning that for us and moderating any questions at the end of the webinar. And that's the time where we encourage you to, if you have questions, turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and ask those questions to our speakers. And then finally, this last one's a little bit different if you've been on our webinars before. We have a lot of data and resources that are going to be presented today. So all of that information will be posted on our website in our highlights. So instead of you having to take screenshots, just feel free to sit back, take in the information, and we'll have all of this data and resources for you as soon as we can publish that. All right, so some quick introductions to our speakers today. I'm very happy to welcome other North Carolina University Food Safety Extension associates and agents with us today. So we're going to kick off our segment today with Elena Rogers. She's a horticulture area specialized agent based in the western region of the state. I'll be taking up the middle of our program today. I'm a food safety extension associate here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then we'll be finishing off our presentation today with Mary Yavalak. She is also a food safety extension associate based in the Charlotte area. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass this over to Elena as she starts us off with some of our fine print for farms.
Okay, so thank you, Kate. Thank you for inviting me to be here. And my name is Elena Rogers. I am one of 2 area specialized agents working under the Department of Horticultural Science and focusing on food safety at the farm level and focusing on fresh produce. So basically, I work with extension agents, I work with the farms directly, I work with the industry and the commodity groups to help farmers understand, to help this audiences understand what the rules and regulations and what the science behind fresh produce safety. And so today I'm going to just give you a very brief overview of a resource that we have developed, and basically to help you understand where does your farm fall under the FSMA produce safety rule. And let me go to the next slide. So this is our website. We have a website, NC Fresh Produce Safety, and we have a lot of resources there. This is where we post all our workshops, all our classes, and we have in the left-hand column, you will see we have a tab for FSMA, or Food Safety Modernization Act, and this is where we basically every year we update all the documents as regulations are being updated, or there are changes in the rules, whatever. And so I want to make sure you have this resource at hand and know that this is how you can always come here. The other thing is there is a tab which is not shown in this page where you can actually register to the website and you can include your address, email address, and that way you will get updates anytime the website has, where we add events or we make changes to the documents that we have there. Okay, so just very briefly as we go into FSMA produce safety rule. Okay, just as a little bit of background, farms themselves can fall into one of three categories. Okay, and so just to kind of like, I felt this like can really give you an understanding of easily. So on the first group, we look at farms that are not considered not covered by the rule. And based on the definition and the adjusted inflation rates for 2024, those are farms that over the last 3 years, they sell less than $31,925 in produce. Okay. Then there is a second category, which the template will be able to help you figure out if that's where you are. But obviously, those would be farms that sell more than $31,925 in produce, but sell less than $638,000, $491 in food sales over the last 3 years. Note that produce, is all fruits and vegetables. Food is anything that humans or animals eat. So if you are a farmer and you sell fruits and vegetables, but you also sell technically hay, per definition, that hay would count into this, and that even though that doesn't make any sense. Okay. The other important part of this definition is that you can also be, in order to be a qualified exempt farm, you also have to sell the most of the food to the end consumer. So, and that is like meaning 51% of your sales have to be to a qualified end user, per definition. So if you, for any reason, obviously sell more than $638,000 in food sales over the last 3 years, or most of your sales are through distribution, wholesalers, then you would be considered a covered farm. And just as a means of, and at this point in time, it may not make a whole lot of sense, but if you FDA does qualify, once you are considered a covered farm, there are definitions for covered farms, and they consider their definition for very small farm are within this category of covered farms. Farms that sell between $31,000 and $250,000, and then there is a second category what FDA considers small farms that are covered, and those are farms that their produce sales were between 250,000 and 638,000. Okay. And I know up to this point, this sounds very confusing, and I apologize, but we do have a template, and this is where I want to ultimately get to. We have a template. It's a 6-page template. And you can scan this QR code and it will take you to our resource that we update every spring when FDA updates their or publishes the adjusted inflation rates. And so you can basically go through this template and step by step fill it out. And that way you can determine whether your farm is a farm that is not covered by the produce safety rule, if it's a farm that is qualified exempt, or if it's a farm that is fully covered by the produce safety rule. And let me see, just a few things on that note, and I'll just show you just to give you a brief example. Okay, this is page 1 of that template. So the first thing would be asking if you grow, if you only grow produce for personal consumption. Obviously, if that's all you do, you are not covered by any of the provisions of the produce safety rule. But let's say you are a small farm, so you would always look at the sales from the last 3 years. You would average through your number, and if your sales are above, okay, if they are less than $31,925, then you would not be covered by this by this rule. And the only reason I want to show you this is because this is a regulation, and this is how the regulation, these are the categories that were included. However, I think you might have heard earlier in these workshops, and when specifically when there was a discussion about the produce safety rule, the fact that food safety practices are always important. Like at the end of the day, bacteria don't care if you operate a very small farm or a very large farm. So you always want to be proactive about implementing food safety practices in your farm, even though the law basically says that you are not covered. As I just briefly kind of want to show you a little more of this template, the next part is if you were to turn the template to page 2, you would see that there's a question about, do you grow rarely consumed raw produce? And that's a yes or no question. And you would say, well, what is rarely consumed raw produce? And what it is, there's a list of 32 commodities that FDA considers that they are rarely ever consumed raw. This means that we either eat them fresh but most of the time they are cooked. And there's not a lot of evidence that, there has probably not been any outbreaks related to these. So if you grow any of these commodities are exempt from inspection and exempt from basically the provisions in the rule up to this point. The next section of this, let me just show you. And this is just to kind of give you a little bit of a taste of what the template does for you. We have tried over time to include as many questions as as possible based on feedback we receive from growers. So you should be able to go through it. But if you have any questions at the end of the template, you will have my contact information, and then you will have my counterpart, Chip Simmons' contact information. And so depending on where you are in the state, you can contact us, and we will be very glad to help you understand, if you answer your questions. The other thing is that you do not need to share this template with anyone, okay? The only time technically that farms would need to share this is if they are claiming that they are qualified exempt, and that is one of the requirements as a qualified exempt farm, that you actually show proof, and that you have receipts that basically back up your math. So this is just like the fourth question in the template. For example, if it asks if you grow produce that will be commercially processed and that will have a kill step, and if you say yes, then that produce would be exempt from the provisions of the produce safety rule. That for most farms, that might be a small portion of what they grow. And just realize that this is language. This does not include food that will be cooked in a restaurant. This is specifically for produce that will be commercially processed. So I don't know if you want me to keep going, Kate, or but or we want to stop here.
Well, thank you, Elena. Is there anything else that's maybe super pertinent to your worksheet? Anything else that you find might be a little bit tricky that you want to real quickly cover before we move on?
Okay, so the only other thing I want to mention is that in page 5 and 6, at the end of the template, we do have a summary of the responsibilities that farms have, or things that you should note if you are obviously a not covered farm. Things that you should note. There are some requirements for qualified exempt farms, very minimal, but those requirements are obviously law now. And then there are also requirements for covered farms. And so covered farms are the farms that will be inspected. If you are a covered farm, you are now under inspection through the NCDA Produce Safety Office. So do make note that those responsibilities apply to whatever farm category you're in, and they are all summarized there. And again, if you need more information, you can reach out to Chip or I, and we will be glad to help you.
Thank you, Elena. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll move into kind of the next stage of our food chain. So I'm going to be handling the fine print for FDA food facilities. All right. So what is a food facility? What's that definition? It's an establishment that's either in one physical location or a mobile unit that does one of the following to food products: manufacturing, processing, packing, and or holding food for human consumption. It also applies to company entities that are processing at a shared facility. So your food facility registration is more so linked to your company and where that company's entity is processing, rather than the brick and mortar location, because you can have multiple companies at that same location. And why did FDA require this registration? It's part of the Bioterrorism Act of 2004. And what it does is it helps communicate with regulators when there is some sort of an outbreak, an investigation, or a bioterrorism act that they need to further investigate. It expedites that communication from our regulators to our food processors. So let's talk some basics of things you have to have ready before you begin your registration process. The good news is for FDA registration, there's no cost for that initial registration, renewals, or any updates or changes to your registration. You will need to gain a unique facilitator identifier, or a UFI, also known as a DUNS number. This is because Dun & Bradstreet is the entity that is providing UFIs for our food facility registrations. And as of right now, it is the only acceptable source of a unique facility identifier. The good news is this service is also at no cost. A little bit of paperwork though. And then some other information that you'll need is your facility name, the address, activity types, and your food product categories. So let's go ahead, let's take a look at these activity types. So here we are. I will say that a lot of our food facilities that we traditionally think of, making pasta, roasting coffee, making candies, they're going to fall into the manufacturer processor. Do note that little asterisk that when you are a manufacturer or a processor, you will need to go one step further and select the product categories of the foods that you're manufacturing or processing. Unfortunately, there's about 3 to 4 dozen different types of product categories, so I'm not going to list them all out here for you, but that will be a resource that you'll be able to easily find in our webinar highlights. All right, what else is up here that we're talking about? A farm mixed type facility. So while Elena covered our farm requirements, this is getting a little bit more detailed. So maybe we have a farm that is growing strawberries, but they're also processing those strawberries into a strawberry jam or preserve. They're kind of playing dual roles there. Then we look at some of our higher risk food products like acidified foods, low acid canned foods. This middle row is a little bit of a lower risk food category. So repackers, relabelers, a salvage operation, or any type of ambient refrigerated and or frozen warehouse. And then down at the very bottom, these are what we see a little bit more infrequently, but an interstate conveyance caterer. Think about the commercial kitchens and commissaries that are making food for airlines, a contract sterilizer, and then those animal food warehouses. If you feel that your food facility doesn't fall into any of these categories, you'll be able to specify that on your application as well. Right. So luckily for us, and I'll say luckily for small businesses, growing businesses, the FDA does provide qualifications that lift some of the requirements from our regulations. A qualified facility, when you submit your attestation to the FDA, they're only going to be subject to subparts A, B, and F of the 21 CFR 117 regulation. And what we're looking at there are general provisions, the current good manufacturing practices for human foods, and then record requirements. So how do you get this attestation? So first and foremost, you do have to provide a self-assessment. This will be done on an annual basis, and what it contains is a review of your company's average annual monetary value for human foods that you manufacture, process, packed, or held. And this is going to be averaged over the prior 3 years. So when this kicked off in 2011, you see that the baseline cutoff was $1 million for a very small food business. Adjusted for inflation, we're looking at an income of about 1.3 million for last year. And they've also updated the average over the last 3 years, which is almost 1.3 million. It's 1.27 million. And this is what will allow you to claim this attestation and have some parts of the requirement removed for your small business. Right, so we've talked a lot about these registrations. So here's a timeline for you to kind of be able to put it into a calendar layout. So that FDA food facility registration has to be done prior to starting your operations and then renewed biannually on even number years. So we're subject this year. Any updates to the registration or a change of ownership has to be done within 60 calendar days. And then finally, that qualified attestation, we're looking at assessing annually on July 1st. And you'll submit an FDA form 3942A when you renew your facility registration biannually. Now, if your company has grown, congratulations, you're no longer a qualified facility. You're processing too much food there for that monetary threshold. You will need to submit that FDA form 3942A by the end of July. So you have that month window period there to assess and file that attestation if you are no longer eligible. Here's a list of exemptions when registering as a food facility. These individuals and company entities do not have to register as a food facility. Our farms, apiary, retail food establishments. Something that is large here in North Carolina are home processors. We do have a great home processing program here in North Carolina. And then we see some of our retail, so grocery stores, convenience stores, nonprofits are also excluded. And then I just wanted to real quickly highlight our farmers markets and fishing vessels. So farmers markets, if you are selling primarily to the end consumer, not wholesale, you are exempt. And fishing vessels are exempt when they're not processing seafood on board. All right, this is also more of an FYI for people moving into acidified foods and low acid canned foods. Because these are higher risk operations and manufacturing, not only is registration required, but also process filing is required. So that's going to include the methods of processing and complete lists of foods that you are processing. As an FYI, I've put the two forms or the two categories of forms that you'll fill out down at the bottom. This is also something that if you work with a process authority, they'll be there to help make sure that these documents are completed for you. But we're looking at a little bit more of a specialized process for this registration and filing. And finally, some North Carolina specific licenses and permits for food facilities. So this is under NCDA's food program, and they are required licensing for the following industries. So our grade A milk operations, they do require an operational permit through the grade A program. And milk haulers and testers also are licensed through the grade A program. On the food side of the industry, we're looking at licensing for cheese and butter processors, as well as for frozen dessert manufacturers. So, and that is the end of my presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Mary take over.
Thanks, Kate. Let me go ahead and pull up my slides. All right. So my name is Mary Yavlak. I am an extension associate in the Department of Ag and Human Sciences. I'm working with a lot of FCS agents. And I'm going to cover some things about retail. So I did want to throw in the chat the link that Kate put together, all the resources Kate put together from the DHHS presentation a couple of weeks ago. So Cheryl Slada did a really great job of giving you guys an overview of what counts as a retail facility, all of the permitting process, the food code, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not gonna go into that stuff, but if you are looking for more of that information, I put that link in the chat and you can go back and look at Cheryl's. What I'm going to talk to you about for the next 10 or so minutes is kind of these exceptions, just as Kate and Elena have talked to you about some of the exceptions with the other groups. Retail does have a little bit of exceptions, but they're a little bit different. So I'm going to talk to you about variances, and that's what that's called. And then also talk to you a little bit about what cooperative extension can offer to businesses and also to regulators. So first of all, what is a variance? Really kind of simply put, variance is just when you are going to go outside of the food code. So it's a written document that's issued by us, the regulatory authority. We have in North Carolina have a variance committee. And it really authorizes a business to go outside of what that food code is. So you learned a couple weeks ago about the food code and how North Carolina everywhere has a set of regulations that are very specific for retail establishments. So North Carolina, that's the North Carolina Food Code Manual, and we have to follow that. Whereas some of these other businesses, there are federal regulations, but you can kind of move within them. The food code is very specific, but there are ways to go outside of it and do things outside, and that is when you would apply for a variance. With a variance, often you also need a HACCP plan. And so HACCP plans are, HACCP stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. And this is really a systematic system that helps control risks throughout the whole process. This is not a retail specific idea. There are HACCP plans in food manufacturing. Very often there are HACCP plans, otherwise in the food system. But retail uses them to say, okay, the food code does a really, really great job of controlling risk to a certain extent. HACCP plans have to have a process that results in equal safety to what's already allowed. So for instance, the food code will say you have to cook your food to a specific temperature. If you want to cook it to a different temperature and don't want to put a consumer advisory on it, you would have to put science, you would have to, give science to the committee that shows that it's going to be equal in safety, that we are not putting people at risk. So let me give you some very high level overview of this stuff. I do want to say HACCP is focused on specific activities. So it's not you write a whole HACCP plan for your entire establishment. That is, the food code manual gives you, things for your entire establishment. This would be for like a fermentation process or a sous vide process, very specific things. This builds on top of the food code. So that means you already have to follow everything in the food code. You have to follow the facilities, the equipment, all of that kind of stuff. And because of that, because we have that food code that is kind of a prerequisite program, retail HACCP is a little bit different from manufacturing HACCP. So if anybody on this call is interested or is doing any of the processes that I'm about to talk about that kind of fall, NC State has a lot of HACCP courses. The manufacturing HACCP courses are really great for processing and manufacturing, but if you go through those courses, you may be a little, some of that stuff may not apply to you because we have the food code as that kind of prerequisite program. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit at the end about some resources that we have on that. This chart will be in what I give Kate to upload, so don't worry too much about jotting this down or taking a screenshot or anything. This just kind of summarizes it's 350212 in the food code is where that HACCP and variant stuff lies. But let me go through just very high level when you would need a variance with the food code is when you are smoking food for preservation, when you're curing it, or when you're adding any kind of components to extend shelf life. So basically, these three are all saying, you learned a couple weeks ago with Cheryl that there's a thing called TCS foods, time temperature control for safety, that have to be put in a specific temperature. You can only keep them for a specific amount of time. If you want to go beyond that, you're going outside of the code. If you're, pickling something and keeping it, and you don't want to put it in the refrigerator. If you want to smoke, fish and not have it be put under date marking, those kinds of things, not have to use it within 7 days. Those kinds of things are where we would see a variance. So really, when you're kind of going outside of that TCS, that's one big reason we'd need a variance. Also, if you're using reduced oxygen packaging, if you have a live molluscan shellfish tank, I'm going to skip down to number 7 and 8. 8 is, sprouting. So sprouting seeds and actually consuming the seed and the sprout portion. And then 7 really is kind of a catch-all. I will say a quick plug for number 6. That's custom processing. So if you are having animals in your establishment and you are slaughtering them and processing the meat, not for retail sale, it used to be that any meat market that was doing custom processing and retail was only regulated by NCDA. Recently, there's been an interpretation change on that, and they're going to be under DHHS. So there are people out there in North Carolina that now have to have a HACCP plan for custom processing, and that a link to a template that we have will also be in the stuff that Kate uploads, so that you don't have to kind of go through that process yourself. That extension can kind of help you write that plan. There are also times where you need that HACCP plan but don't need a variance, when you're doing things like having a specific water activity when the pH is specific. You're still going to need to have that HACCP plan to show that you're doing it safely and monitoring, but you don't need a variance. This all will be in those resources. Quickly, in terms of variance and HACCP, all these 2 charts are going to show you is that with a variance, things get sent to the variance committee. Without a variance, you still go through the process and you work with your local health department or an REHS, and then sometimes it just still stays in the local office if you don't have to have a variance, and then they're going to come out and do a field verification. So I am part of what is called the Safe Plates brand at NC State. So just like Elena and Kate talked to you about their roles in Extension, I also sit in Extension, and we have this food safety brand that we do both Extension and research. And we offer many training and educational programs, both through our statewide staff and then also through local Extension agents. And a couple of those that we offer are we actually offer a course about variances and HACCP as a partnership with DHHS. It's called Validation and Verification of HACCP Plans in Retail Food Establishments. As I mentioned kind of at the beginning, or a little bit when I was talking about, HACCP classes, there are plenty of HACCP classes that NC State offers, and a lot of them are done online, but this one is specific to retail. So if you are looking for retail specific stuff, the link to that slide, or the link to that course in the chat, you can find it there. We also offer a managers and a handlers class. So you learned a couple weeks ago with Cheryl that there are requirements, at least for the manager side, that the managers have to have a specific certification or demonstrate knowledge in another way. We do offer one of those certification programs called Safe Plates for Food Managers. We also offer a smaller, less intensive, and also you don't get a certification, a course that's just for food handlers, called Safe Plates for Food Handlers. And that link that I just put in the chat, you can find about all of these classes, I believe, in that link. And especially for the managers and the handlers, you can find where classes will be delivered near you locally. So to the agents, I know there's a couple agents on the call, make sure that you're putting things up in in that calendar so that people can see where things are being delivered locally. My contact information is on the slide, and also I'll be giving that to Kate to upload. So if you need anything retail wise, I know this was very high level. If you need anything retail wise, feel free to reach out. And then you can also visit that link that I put in chat for more information about our programs. And I will turn it back over to Kate.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in our chat or our Q&A. So I would like to take this moment to thank everyone who joined us here today. Lynette's going to go ahead. She's going to pop that survey link into our chat. If you wouldn't mind, here in Extension, we find what we need to do based off of your feedback. So if you could provide that to us, we would be so appreciative. I want to give a huge thanks to Elena and Mary for joining me today. And our final webinar in 2 Fridays on labeling and allergens. We hope to see you there. I hope everyone has a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Thank you.